George and I were on a panel recently, and there was a judge from Michigan who came up with a statistic that sort of blew me away at the time. I guess if I'd thought about it, it wouldn't have. But he said, you know, 97% of all litigation goes on in state courts. And federal court is like 3%. Of the 3% of cases, civil cases that get filed in federal court, something like 1% go to trial. So maybe it's because we such a cash flow hemorrhage getting there, people settle without ever getting to the merits. But in California, there was mention made that I think last year we passed e-discovery rules, which are basically similar to the federal court with some wrinkles, and yet, as nearly as I can tell, nothing has happened in California to implement those rules. It is as though nothing happened. What, Mark?
I would agree. We've seen virtually no change. I mean, what I've started saying to people is that I think this EDRM and e-discovery process may mature just as all of us mature. I think those of us who have been around for a while and people who have been around longer than me have a certain way of doing things. And sure, some older people are very savvy and are, you know, hit ESI, but I really think we're going to see a sea change as the future generations come along who are much more comfortable with the technology. That's a slightly off the subject comment, but that's how I think the change will be driven, because we've seen virtually no change. Almost all of our litigation is in state court. We have very little federal court litigation, and I really thought that we would see a snowball effect once the California rules were enacted, and there's been just none.
The only exception to that is in the complex civil divisions like in LA and here in San Francisco, where I think you know, they were dealing with it all along, even in the absence of the rules. But for example, there is an early meet and confer requirement in the Code of Civil Procedure. I don't think anybody does it. And for not doing it, I'm not seeing the courts sanctioning it.
Changing gears a little bit, Browning and others are fond of saying, or inquiring sometimes, technology has gotten into this mess, very clearly, although we've aided and abetted the technology along the way. Is it going to get us out of this mess? And in particular, is it going to help us with containing or reducing those sometimes gargantuan costs as well as the risks that we're looking at?
Well, it can. If people are savvy enough to know how to categorize documents and add retention periods where they can actually get rid of documents, that would be great. It just, I gotta say, out of most of the people in the room, I mean, if you actually said how many people hoard literally every single document, you want to raise your hand? Because I bet you there's a lot of hoarders in the room, right? And so, I mean, that's, if you're not going to start there, the technology essentially isn't really going to ever help you, because you're not going to be deleting documents. I mean, we can talk about automated review and how that has progressed, but you're really still talking about a gigantic corpus of documents that ultimately has to be dealt with. And so until you really are on the far left-hand side and you're actually deleting documents and really having a defensible retention period, I don't know if technology is going to help you. I think technology can help you on that side, but until that happens, I'm just not sure technology is going to help you.
It can help in certain contexts. I had this one client which was a defendant in a case, and it didn't view itself as the real target defendant. So what was done was we had custodians and search terms, and then the search terms were cut across as custodians in the databases, and information was produced without a whole lot of advanced review. There was a very strong protective order in place that also allowed for clawback. And the client's position was, well, stuff goes across the table, and we don't like it when it first comes up. We'll claw it back. Frankly, I think we're going to settle out of this case. And the client was actually smart. We did settle out relatively early in the litigation. The client avoided a lot of review cost up front by simply using technology in this way. It was pretty much against my recommendation. It was pretty ballsy, I got to be honest with you.
Yeah, actually a little surprised. I would never use the clawback. I just don't. I've never really thought about using it very much at all.
So Eric, having seen that once, and having seen it succeed in spite of your recommendations, have your recommendations changed at all?
That was sort of a one-time event for me.
No.
I still don't advise that. I believe in review, knowing what the other side's getting from you, and not producing privileged information or trade secret information or things like that.
But you know, I would be interested in talking to in-house counsel. I think one of the biggest challenges that everybody faces, law firms, everybody, is the litigation hold challenge. First of all, when is it triggered? I do the litigation holds when our firm gets subpoenas or sued from time to time, always improvidently, mind you. But we do get sued from time to time, and so implementing the litigation hold has really caused us to take a long, hard look at how, in fact, do we implement it, how do we have an audit trail and the like. We're about to implement some software, but what are you folks doing in terms of instituting litigation holds and then tracking? Are you using technology, using spreadsheets? What's the status?
So we have litigation hold templates that we've developed. We develop them in-house, but there are all sorts of guidebooks and stuff these days. We try and get them out as early as we think it's appropriate to do so, and we actually get them out pre-litigation fairly frequently. We get a lot of claims, or we have things that happen. I won't get specific,
Equally improvident.
Of course, but you know, we have things that happen that make it obvious to us that there will be litigation, and we will issue a hold very promptly. And then it is a challenge. It's a real challenge to ensure that people are complying with the holds, particularly if you've got dozens, hundreds, or even thousands of custodians. We're just in the process of buying and ultimately rolling out a litigation hold tool, but so far it really is more kind of the spreadsheet in-house way. And again, we've gotten by with it, but you know, the clock is ticking.
Yeah, and it's the exact same thing. We've looked at litigation hold technology, haven't implemented it yet, but have our templates, have used radio buttons to show that folks have received it, they're acknowledging it, have used follow-ups, interviews, collect early where we can to preserve. So that's what we're doing. I mean, the biggest challenge for me, quite frankly, is often when you do it. Many times it's clear when you do it. You've been sued, so you do it. But even then, it's not always clear because, let's say you're in a patent lawsuit, which we often see. Pleading standards in patent lawsuit are very low, really. You say, someone, the plaintiff might say, Netflix, you're infringing our patent because you have a website. Patent is generally drafted, and so what are we being sued for? And so we've been sued, so they're, honestly, presumptively, there's a litigation hold obligation, but we don't know what we've been sued for. So those are more the challenges that I face, sort of when you do it. Generally, the process is there, although not fully automated using the technology yet.
One thing I wanted to add, I'm glad that you were saying you were collecting early, because I've noticed that you can send out litigation holds, you can track them. I mean, there's tons of software out there for that kind of thing. But what really is more important, I think, for everyone that has to essentially shoulder the risk, is you have to be able to preserve the documents. So you have to collect them fast, or somehow be able to stop retention periods, if you have any retention periods, or otherwise make sure that you have the documents. Because my greatest fear personally is after Adams v. Wingborn and all the other ones is that you have to figure out when the trigger is, which is almost impossible to know after the Adams case. But the bigger thing is, can I really trust the people to do it? And I can check up with them, and I can do surveys, and I can go and talk to all of them. But I still worry that someone's telling me, "Oh, of course I'm saving that. Of course I am." But then I don't have the ability to go into their computer and to look at all of it, and I would know if they deleted something anyway. So I feel much better if I can figure out a way to actually preserve the data almost behind the scenes, or do it as quickly as possible so that I can have it. And that way I feel like I can actually go to court and say, yeah, I've got the data, no problem at all. I'll still send out litigation hold notices, I'll still track them and everything else, but for me, it was just bigger to figure out a way to preserve the data.